Okay, do you want to make this bread at home? You can make this bread at home. Today on Cookbook Corner, I'm going to share with you one of my absolute favorite home bread baking and pastry baking cookbooks. The Cookbook Corner today is going to get you here. Today we're going to talk about Nick Malgieri, How to Bake. Okay, welcome to the Cookbook Corner. We are going to be talking about one of my favorite cookbooks today. I'm excited to share it with you. I have a beautiful hot coffee in my hand. I mean, it's really hot. I like coffee to kind of hurt a little bit. I hope you have something lovely to sip on while we talk about Nick Malgieri and his book, How to Bake, because it's so wonderful. So, are you an afternoon coffee person like me? If you're new to my channel, welcome. Cookbook Corner with Chef A. And in this little corner of the internet, I share some of my favorite cookbooks. My personal cookbook collection is about 400 books right now, so I have a lot to share. So let's get started. How to bake. I'm actually going to need to put some glasses on for this. So, how to bake. Let's start there. Look how torn and tattered this is. You think the outside's bad. Wait till you see the inside of this. This book actually has a cover. Mine is long gone. It's dark green like this band is. It's a hunter green. And it says How to Bake on the cover. But it is How to Bake by Nick Malgieri. And this book clearly is beloved. I mean, it's just tattered and torn and beat to pieces. I'm trying to think when I got this book if I actually bought it probably pretty close to the publication date, which if I remember is around 1995. It's the coffee, it makes me smarter. 1995, Nick Malgieri. I have come to understand that one of the reasons that this particular book, and actually any of Nick Malgieri's cookbooks, please look him up. You can find him. I know he has a Facebook page, but he's super famous, so he's got all kinds of great stuff out there. You can find Nick Malgieri. The thing is, he's a teacher, and I am a teacher, and I have certainly come to understand that teachers have a tendency to write recipes in a way that's just so much easier to understand sort of the nuances. We skip a lot of the nonsense, and we also have a tendency as teachers to kind of simplify things down, not to dumb them down by any means. You saw the bread that I got following his basic rustic white bread recipe. But we have a way of not overcomplicating things that do not need to be overcomplicated. Teachers are good about that. And I've come to understand that part of the reason I really loved this book so much long before I really, I didn't go into culinary school until 2001. So in 1995, I was still just a home cook. Just a home cook. Home cooks are everything. I was still a home cook. And I loved baking bread. I had been baking bread. My mom and I messed around with baking bread when I was a kid. I'd always loved it, and I had marginal results. I mean, I was okay at it. Excuse me. I teach a lot of bread baking classes here at A Chef's Cooking Studio, and if I'm perfectly honest, the bread baking classes might be my favorite. I don't know. I mean, I really love our Home Chef series, but I just love baking bread and teaching about baking bread and just watching bread mysteries become unraveled and home cooks figuring it out. Why that it's so doable at home. Anyway, that's about the studio. Let's talk about the book. I think Nick Malgieri is a great writer, and he's really good at creating recipes that allow you to tackle some things at home that I think you might have been nervous about otherwise. Let me show you a couple pages in here that I flagged. I covered up the ingredients because I don't want to really give anything away. If you're interested in his cookbooks, then support him and go buy a cookbook. Or look on the internet, see what he's got out there. Look at the pages of this book. I love a cookbook. Look, and the spine is like all wiggly. It's falling apart. I'm having a hard time holding it together. I love when people have cookbooks that look like this. Stained and written in. That's the sign of a great cookbook. Because it means it's just one that you go to again and again and again and again. So some things about the Nick Malgieri How to Bake is that this book has a tendency, I'll read for you the sections that are in it. So he has quick breads, scones, and muffins. Then he has breads and rolls. And what he means there are yeasted breads, savory pastries, pies, tarts, because pies and tarts are just ever so slightly different animals, cookies and small pastries, cakes. And when he's talking cakes, he's talking layer cakes. I'll show you a picture in a minute. Puff pastry and cream puff pastry. And then sweet yeast risen bread. So like, see how section 1 is quick breads, scones, and muffins? Quick breads are things like zucchini bread, banana bread, walnut bread. The leavener in quick breads is going to be like baking soda or baking powder. So that's what's quick about them. It's, there's no yeast involved, no proofing, no time to rise the dough, things like that. So quick breads, but quick breads also have a tendency to be on the sweeter side, right? I mean, when you think about a zucchini muffin or something like that, it's got a sweet nature to it. So then you come all the way down through everything and get down to sweet yeast risen breads and pastries. Those are definitely more complicated in the world of baking. And so you're thinking about things here that are going to be like Danish or cinnamon buns. Those are doughs that are yeast risen and sweet, but because they're yeast risen, they're a little bit more advanced. So it kind of works its way through. Honestly, if you bought this book and started on chapter 1, recipe 1, and just cooked your way through it, if you're going to do that, you might have to invite me over. I might need to be a part of that experiment. I almost have cooked my way through this, except to say that I don't do a lot of cake and pastry baking myself. What I need to clarify about that is it's not that I'm not interested in that product. I kind of jokingly tell people, but I don't know if it's really a joke, that I kind of am thinking about cake from the minute I wake up until the minute I go to bed every day of my life. I adore sweet pastries. Love them. Maybe it's like a internal like fail safe. You know what I mean? Like an internal backup that knows if I bake a cake, that would probably be a lot of trouble for me. Because if I bake a cake, I'll eat it. But I do bake a lot of bread and I eat all that. I don't know. But beautiful recipes throughout. What I want to tell you about Nick's book that I love, you saw that recipe I just flagged for you, that Neapolitan pizza. When we get into his recipes, one thing about Nick's writing style that I think is really cool when he produces recipes for you is that on any given recipe, he does a little opening and then he'll say, if you're going to mix this by hand, if you're going to mix this with hand beaters, if you're going to mix this in a stand mixer, right? So for each recipe, he tends to break down the 3 or 4 ways that we might go about making this batter or this dough. And he does that for every recipe. So you can start to create a groove when you're working through Nick Malgieri recipes. My groove is that at home, I work with a stand mixer a lot. In part because my stand mixer is totally accessible to me. The way that my kitchen is set up, my stand mixer is hanging out on this counter right here. Like it's 100% accessible all the time. I don't have to move it or lift it or adjust it or go find the bowl or the paddle. It's just right here. So it's very accessible to me. So notice on this book that you can see some lines drawn through. So because Nick breaks this down to if you're going to mix it by hand, if you're going to mix it with, beaters, if you're going to mix it in a stand mixer, what I go through when I do a recipe of his for the first time is I just take a pencil and just put a very thin line through the paragraphs that explain if you're going to mix this in a manner that I'm not. Okay, so if you're going to mix this by hand, nope, I'm not. If you're going to mix this with stand beaters, I'm not. I'll just run a line through it. And so here's a good example. What I did is ran a line through what didn't matter and then put a little arrow to the paragraph that does matter, which is if you're going to do this in a stand mixer, which I am. And for every recipe I've ever done in a Nick Malgieri book, that's what I've done. And I didn't make the, if you want to mix this by hand, unreadable. I didn't cross it out with magic marker. Just put a really thin line through it. And what that does for me as a reader, as a participant in this book, is it allows me to go to that recipe and just bypass information that I don't need when I'm about to make this the second, third, fifth time, etc. The other thing that I'll say about cookbooks is any book, whether it's Nick's or any book, is give yourself a rating system for how that recipe worked for you. The system that I do, I used to do GVGE. Good, very good, excellent. Good meant that it was worth repeating, but pay attention to the notes I've written. I've made some adjustments. VG is very good. It means that follow it to the letter and there might be a single note off to the side. You know, I decided that this did better at 350 than 375, whatever that may be, but a marginal change. If I saw an E for excellent written into my book, no changes. You follow it exactly as written and you will have excellent results every time. I've actually gotten rid of the G rating in my cookbooks now. It's just VG or E. And here's the story. VG is worth doing, but there's going to be a note or two on the side that I need to not forget. So take a look at that. E means don't change a thing. And so E is the recipe I'll go for, like if company's coming. And I just know I need to do something that's going to be fun and impressive and lovely and won't require any extra thought from me. The author has done their work. So the Nick Malgieri book, it's full of E's. E's, 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 E's. Everything's excellent. There's really nothing in here that I've ever changed that's fundamental to the recipe. I'm having more coffee. I hope you're drinking something lovely right now. I love herb tea, but I'm a coffee early, herb tea mid-morning, coffee afternoon. That's my rotation. I get a lot of water in there too. So what would be something that would get an E? It's excellent. It has no notes on it whatsoever. What would be something that would get a VG? Very good. Means that I had to give myself a little, the first time I did something, I tweaked it ever so slightly. So like this English muffin recipe, I made a note here to myself. Be careful. Note, do not roll too thin. Now, here's the thing. If I go back to make English muffins and it's been a year since I've done it, won't I be glad that that note is there, that the first time I did this, I rolled them too thinly. And so they were nice and they were good little English muffins, but when I went to go split them, there wasn't quite enough material there. I also gave myself a note that says, preheat my cast iron pan on a setting number that's specific to my electric range at home. That has nothing to do with Nick's writing or Nick's recipe, right? So this is an excellent recipe. That's not a note that required any sort of changing. It was just information for me down the road. And this happens throughout this whole book. There's no changes for anything that I've done. Sometimes I'll give myself some math. I'll pencil it in. And by the way, write in your cookbooks, guys. Look, I know some people are like, oh, no, don't dog-ear your books and don't write in them. Man, they're your book. Do whatever you want to do. You'll be so glad, though, if you start taking notes, especially in cookbooks. I guess this day and age, you know, we print copies out on the internet and can write all over those. But you're going to lose those. You know you are. Okay, so like Neapolitan Pizza, the notes that are on this, again, don't have anything to do with changing the recipe in any way, shape, or form. I often double this recipe, so I penciled in the ×4 math. I made a note to myself about how I like to store excess dough. So if I do it ×4, I'm gonna have a bunch of individual pizza doughs, how I like to store them in an oiled Ziploc bag and freeze them. that didn't do anything to the recipe, right? So that still gets an E. It's an excellent recipe. It's just a little note for me. Nick Malgieri does something in the front of his books that I think a lot of cookbook authors do. And if you're wondering how to start a cookbook collection at home, that's books that are really valuable, that work, one thing I'll tell you is to keep an eye out for this version or this part of a cookbook. And it's the how to use this book. And I see that now and then as we go through cookbooks in the cookbook corner. I'll point those out when I find them. If you find this section in the front of a cookbook, you already know that you're working with a valuable author and a valuable cook, because they've taken the time to explain to you what's between their ears, some of their thinking and their philosophies, some of their base ingredients, maybe even brands that are specific to them. So how to use this book, read this part. Listen, when you get this cookbook home, get yourself something to drink, have a seat, and just settle in. Because this gives you a lot of information about what the author wants you to know about utilizing their formulas and their recipes. So especially with things like baking, Nick is not big into weighing things out. So everything is going to be a 3/4 of a cup or 3 tablespoons, etc. And frankly, that's my preferred method too. I know, but you know, I mean, I'm an American. I'm American. It is what it is. And to be honest with you, scales feel tedious to me sometimes. I know, it is so weird. We all have our own hangups. Listen, if you are a weigh stuff out person, that's a note that I would make in my cookbooks. I would take a recipe, and where it says 3 cups, I would measure my 3 cups, put them in a bowl, weigh them, and make a note to yourself that's however many grams when you weigh it out. You'll be glad to have that info down the road instead of continuously converting. But Nick and he keeps things simple measurements. But for example, in the how to use this book, he'll mention techniques about measuring and why he uses a liquid measure for liquids and a dry measure for dry and things of that nature. So he has a whole note about measuring here. That's his personal views on how to measure things in your home kitchen. And if you're going to use this book, that's going to be valuable information. So I think it's really cool when authors take the time to do a how to use this book segment in their cookbooks. And I don't know that a lot of them do. I'll keep you posted as we go throughout the series. But Nick Malgieri, How to Bake, I'll show you a couple fun photos in here. This page, you guys, I don't know what to do with this page. This page literally elicits so much potential joy that I sweat a little bit when I see it. It is, are you kidding me? I mean, look at that cake. So beautiful photos. His pastry, I'm telling you. I said I don't do a lot of dessert baking at home. I actually do his chocolate bûche de Noël. It's his Genoa sponge that I use for my bûche de Noël when I make that at Christmas. And I do make a bûche de Noël at Christmas sometimes. It's really fun to do, and I don't know, it's a fun little project. They're not huge, you know, they're sort of manageable. So of the pastries of his, I have definitely done those. I've made his croissants, and actually Nick Malgieri's How to Bake was the eye opener to changing up some ideas about scones and scone making. I feel pretty certain that I'm right about this. He does a lemon and cornmeal and dried cherry. Let's see, lemon, cornmeal, and dried cherry scone. Oh, that thing is delicious. And the addition of the cornmeal gives the scone, believe it or not, this sort of seems counterintuitive, but it actually almost sort of lightens the scone up. You know how scones sometimes can be a little on the dense side? And you can mitigate that by not overworking them, by the way. But there's something about the air that's around that cornmeal that actually sort of lightens these up a bit. But also, I think that one of the reasons this particular recipe freezes incredibly well is that the cornmeal does better in the freezer than just all flour. Wonder why that would be. I'll have to think about that. But lemon cornmeal scones with dried cherries. I often substitute dried cranberries for this recipe just because they're easier for me to find. But any dried fruit would be lovely. And I have done them with just chopped up apricots or something like that too. But that's a great recipe. And this is another example. I don't really have this one here. I'll block this one out real quick and I'll show you what I mean. Because these freeze so incredibly well. Also, every recipe, he tells you how to serve it and he tells you how to store it. That's a big deal. Do you know that? Not a lot of chefs bother to do that. Let's see, how can I block this out quickly? So storage and serving, that's in every single recipe. What's his favorite way to serve it and how do you store it? Especially with pastry, that's kind of important to know. Listen, and with bread recipes down here in Florida, storing them is something you have to think about. You know, it's the tropics here. So, okay. So what I want to show you on this one is, see these numbers here that I wrote in? I double this recipe. Look at that big E. I told you. So there's an E. And you can see there's no notes on it. I don't change anything. I just gave myself a note about some math. Double. I went ahead and wrote what this recipe is so that I didn't have to keep doing the math every time I came to it. And the reason is because these freeze so well, I double the recipe all the time. So I made a note that if you don't use cherries, you could use dried cranberries, but big fat E right on top of it. This is a fun book, Nick Malgieri, How to Bake. Find his Facebook page because I know he does have a Facebook presence. Listen, if you happen to be in New York, which people living in New York is like, I don't know, it feels a little bit like fairy tale land to me. Like it's mystic, the lives of people who live in New York City. What you have access to, it just must be incredible because I live in the boondocks. I have access to a lot of highway and railroad track. But if you live in New York, you can find Malgieri. He's still doing classes. I think that he started doing some video sessions during kind of lockdown and when everybody's sort of going for that. And I think he's still got some of that going, which is great. So check him out, Nick Malgieri. Listen, he's got a lot of other books out, okay? As I said, 1,200 books in my cookbook collection. We had to rein this bad boy in. We had to bring it down. So it's down to about 400, and How to Bake made the cut. It's still here. I still use it all the time. I show it to my students in my cooking classes so that they have an idea of what a well-loved cookbook should look like. So I hope you'll give it a try. Nick Malgieri, How to Bake. Here's what, if you bake something out of this, post it in the comments below. I'd love to see it. If you're already a Nick Malgieri fan, let's have a comment. Tell me about it. I had a student here recently taking a class of mine. What was she taking? Oh, shoot, I don't remember what we were making. Maybe baguettes. And she said she'd taken classes with Nick Malgieri. I was like, whoa, super jealous. That's cool. And then, listen, Nick got my bread baking at home back on track. You know, certainly when I went to culinary school, did my game change even further? A bit, for sure. But what I share here is how to bake bread at home for home cooks. I know the pitfalls that we can fall into there. And I feel like this book really gives you a solid foundation. Follow these recipes. They are trustworthy. They're beautifully written. And I think that you'll love them. And so I hope you will give it a try. Cookbook Corner with Chef A today, How to Bake. I gotta go because my coffee is getting low and I need to tear into that bread behind me and the butter is now soft. All right, you guys, have a delicious day. We'll look forward to seeing you here sometime soon.